We're glad you joined us for New Life Live. To be a part of the program, call 1-800-229-3000. Now, back to the program.
We're back. Stephen Arterburn here. Many of you know that New Life acquired Remuda Ranch many years ago, and it was very small. And when it went to another organization, it was very big, and now it's really big and very effective. It's state-of-the-art. We partner with them, and it is the eating disorder resource or hospital or clinic that you would want your child to be in if there's any way to get them in there. If my daughter ever developed an eating disorder, that's where I would sell the car to get her there. I would sell the house to get her there, because how sad when people are still struggling into their 30s and 40s because no one got them the help that they needed. Well, on the phone we have Dr. Amy Wasserbauer from Remuda Ranch, and she specializes in childhood obesity and adult eating disorders. And Amy, welcome to, or should I say Dr. Amy, or do you prefer Dr. Wasserbauer, eliminating any connection whatsoever?
Thank you, Steve. It's an honor to be with you, and you can call me Amy.
Okay, well, we were just talking about childhood and chaotic childhood, and you know, how does something like that, how does a troubling childhood lead to an adult eating disorder, especially in a woman? How does that happen?
Well, what we see often in our adult population, of course, is the life story begins as a young child, and there we get the themes and the understanding that something wasn't right, and there were struggles, whether it was in her own personality of just sensitivity and an inability to be heard emotionally, can take her to a place of turning to food for comfort. And so in that turning to a behavior that helps give her comfort, she begins to potentially gain weight.
Yeah.
But the obesity is secondary to potentially her emotional struggles, conflict and chaos in the family, maybe disturbing events that have happened at school from friends. There are multiple reasons.
Okay, let me just interrupt you, because you just did something very important there that I think a lot of people overlook. It's not always what happens at home that disrupts a child's reality and veers them off on a path. It can be at school.
Yeah.
The school can be a traumatic experience, either on the playground or in the classroom, or at a friend's house. You know, we go back to the parenting, but you've just said it right there. It could be something at school that has devastated a child, and it can be something pretty simple that leads them to repeat that same pattern.
I know multiple times in my treatment overview with adult patients, a wound that we'll instantly talk about. This is something that occurs many times with children, is a learning disability.
Yeah, right.
And if a child is tested and said, I have a reading learning disability, and he's pulled out every day for an hour of tutoring, well, we know they can still have an amazing high IQ, but the message they get from that is, I'm stupid, I'm not good enough, which again is not a reality, but to a child, I'm not okay.
Yeah,
and
that's right.
that
Something's
alone
wrong with
can
me.
be a trigger to begin to do something to cope. And I think sometimes family and school officials don't understand that there is this emotional component where they need support in the midst of getting that academic tutoring to help them.
Now, life always makes sense. You know, there's always a reason for things, and so the eating disorder, though destructive, it's serving some kind of purpose for this child. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, I'll often say to families, when you see a behavior, please remember the behavior is the tip of the iceberg, and that tip is only the beginning. The eating disorder is a coping mechanism, and they're coping in order to get needs met that they have not had met in their life.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are many functions to an eating disorder at many levels. You know, the internal functions can be to gain a sense of power or control, or to avoid facing the world. Maybe they have some maturation fears, a fear of expressing emotions, or to deal with effects of trauma or abuse. That's just the internal functioning.
Okay, so how does this work in the mind of a child when maybe they haven't been nurtured and loved and felt secure through their childhood, And so they develop this eating disorder, and it gives them a sense of comfort and soothing, and even a sense that they are in control a bit. They have something they can do that they can control. And then a parent notices and comes in and tries to control their eating disorder. What does that do?
Well, I think initially the parent isn't understanding, and so they're trying to say, well, eat your food. Why aren't you eating your food?
Yeah.
Or why are you running to the bathroom after we eat every night? You know, and so it overwhelms parents. I mean, parents, if you see any symptom of restriction or binging or purging, instantly get help. Talk to a professional, because it's tough to understand in that moment.
Yeah.
And so don't play around with it. And to try to control the food without support can perpetuate and even magnify the problem.
Yeah.
Because then the child can become sneakier and can take it underground even more.
Okay, so we do this show. Most of our audience are Christians. Is the Christian community any different than the secular world? Is it worse? Is it better?
Well, very honestly, Steve, in my qualitative perspective of 9 years at Remuda and working in higher education for a long time, in Christian settings even, I see, sadly, that oftentimes in the Christian world, there's a perspective of I have to have it all together. Now, I know this isn't Christ, and I know it's not the gospel, but this perception drives Christians then to want to look a certain way. Recently, I heard a patient say, being more spiritual equals being thinner. Thought that was interesting.
Well, I wonder how they got to that point. Because maybe you fast more than somebody else? I don't know.
Right. I do this more, or my body looks more perfect, which is what then the effects of our culture.
Right.
But again, in the Christian world, sometimes I find, especially with young women, this expectation of I've got to look a certain way. I don't do drugs or alcohol, but boy, I better manipulate my food to make myself feel more perfect, because the message underlying that is I'm not good enough.
Yeah.
And so, unfortunately, a high percentage of our women and adolescents that come to Remuda who are Christians have this perception of, I was really doing this to be good, to be better. But then what also precipitates out of that is then there's extreme shame, and then they run from God. They hide from God. So there's no freedom to confess and say, I need help and support, which then drives the behaviors even more intensively.
Okay, so I think just a really good point for parents is that when the problem develops, first you don't really understand it, and you're trying to understand it. And secondly, you may think it's your fault. But I think there's so many different things that a young girl can get snagged on, whether it's the image of Hollywood or this feeling of not good enough. There are all these little different snag points that can veer them off into this. And rather than try to protect your image as a parent or prove that you really have it, the goal is for you to kind of surrender all of that, deal with that stuff later that involves you, but get your child help. Now, when somebody calls you at Remuda, what can they expect would be different about your center than some other place that they would go?
Well, I would say the uniquenesses of Remuda Ranch, number one, is we are a Christian, biblically based treatment center, scientifically valid treatment facility. But the first thing they're going to notice if they call our admissions office is that every admissions counselor is a believer. They are willing and wanting to hear the heart of the parent calling and saying, what are the issues? What are the things that you see your child, your adolescent, even your young adult child dealing with? They want to hear the heart of the person calling, and then they will very accurately help in connection over months sometimes to support them, to guide them to the aid they might need, determining if the person's behavior does necessitate inpatient treatment versus outpatient. We will give connection and contacts with providers if we don't sense they need inpatient, but if we do, we'll we will support them each step of the way in getting their child the help they need.
All right. So just as if someone in your family had cancer, you'd try to find the best resource possible for that treatment of that cancer. Same thing with an eating disorder. Seek out
Absolutely.
the best, and that is Remuda Ranch. No question about it. And you can find out information by calling us at 1-800-NEW-LIFE. We talked about the formation of the brain earlier. The sooner you get control of this by getting help, the better. The less damage is done. And there's some of the saddest calls we get are those people still struggling in their 30s and 40s with an eating disorder because it wasn't treated young. So 1-800-NEW-LIFE. Ask us about Remuda Ranch. And our thanks to you, Dr. Amy, and we'll see you here next time. We'll be back right after this.